In the book, you read about different theories of intelligence, multiple intelligences, things like that. We're not going to talk about that so much. I'm going to go over a little bit about how intelligence is measured by psychologists, IQ tests. But then the main focus is, as I mentioned last week, for what I want to talk about is to expand upon what the book mentions a little bit as well about racial differences in America in IQ and why they do exist, and why is it that they might exist. First of all, just the definition of intelligence: the capacity to learn and use skills required for successful adaptation to the demands of one's culture and environment. G, who remembers what G is from the book? General intelligence, right. So, like Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences says that, well, there's kind of letters and numbers, math and kind of language, but then there's also music. There's kind of physical coordination, athletic ability, that all kind of fit this definition here. All right, skills required for successful adaptation to the demands of one's culture and environment. T.O., for all his problems, is making a lot more money than I ever will. So in one sense, he's adapting very well to his environment. He obviously has some other issues, but people with or music abilities, whatever, can be considered very adaptive. And so why would we prioritize thinking about numbers or letters or something like that in terms of what we call intelligence versus other aspects of competence? Well, most psychologists believe, there are different multiple domains of intelligence, but that there also is a kind of a common theme among those called G, or general intelligence, so that you can talk about both. So that if you do look at different, and you see that in, the more classic distinction in terms of intelligence is between like visual spatial skills and kind of language skills. Kind of more of a kind of math versus English or a language kind of a thing. And people can have pretty discrepant scores on those two domains, but yet there still remains similarity if you look over thousands, tens of thousands of kids or adults in America. You do tend to see people being higher in both, and then some people just being lower in both. So there does seem to be a common element. And that element, we're not sure exactly what that element is, but just one thing might be kind of processing speed, like neurons being firing. Or, like I said, we don't know, but that's one theory about what that might be. How do we measure intelligence? These are some of the just samples from a kid's intelligence test. Let's see. Which number series? Which number comes next in the series? Can we figure that out? What's the answer to that? 11. I heard a 10. If I buy 6 cents worth of candy and give the clerk 25 cents, I would get how much back? 19. Intelligence. Difficult. And these are, many of these, like that one, for example, are timed. Not all of them, but some of them are timed, so that you're not looking just at correctness, but also how quickly a kid can come up with the answer. So, for example, I know the bottom one is timed. Arranging pictures in the right order so that they make sense. What's the correct order? Somebody tell me. You could either be the first thing before they grab it, or it could be the kid pulling away. I'm pretty sure that it's 1, 4, 3, 2. Yeah, is the right answer. Anyway, but I mean that's kind of interesting right there, though, in terms of how valid our intelligence tests. Well, but you could interpret that in a reasonable way. like you just did, about what that first picture means. But like I said, so, and it's not that you just get one of these, but so there's different tests. These are all different subtests, and there would be a bunch of picture series. It wouldn't just be one, but there would be a bunch, and they would get increasingly more difficult to do. And the way it works is you just kind of figure out what the kid's age is, and then they tell you, they have a list of, say, let's say 15 picture series that go from something that like a preschooler could do all the way up through like things that nobody could do. And so based on their age, you kind of start at a certain number, and then you move forward until, you know, they get 2 wrong in a row. So you don't necessarily take all 15, you keep going until they get 2 wrong in a row, because then, you know, at some point they get too difficult, and you don't want the kid to get, you know, just upset and frustrated, so you stop. Probably my favorite one, which is not up there, I don't think, is called digit span, and that's where you read numbers, and the kid has to read them back, or recite them back to you, and it starts with just 2 numbers, but then it goes up to 9. So if I say 2, 7, you say
2, 7.
Okay, and if I say 3, 6, 7, 4, 2, 9, 8, 3.
3, 6, 7, 4, 9, 3, 8 p.m.
Okay. How many was that? 7 or 8? What? How many did I have? I was just making it up. 8. Yeah, it wasn't 9. But then after, so if they can get through all of those, then you do it backwards. So if I say, I mean, the reciting is backwards. So if I say 8, 3, you say 8. And if I say 7, 2, 3, 1, 9, 5, 6, 7, 2, you say. Well, you can see why they stopped after you get 2 wrong in a row, because it gets very frustrating. So you would start with just 2, and then you see how far the kid can get. Anyway, so these are different tests that are used. What do you notice, though, about these? Are these good tests of intelligence? And if not, which ones? What do you notice? Are they kind of innate intelligence, your ability to kind of think about things?
Well, especially the questions of like the verbal reasoning or general information, those are somewhat culture-based. I mean, like the interest they put is, you know, those are English forms of measurement. School work with the metric system, they don't ever use engines of foot.
Yeah, well, certainly, right. You would only give within a certain country, but you're right. It's well, what does telephone mean? I mean, what if you grew up without telephone? Probably sounds funny, but there are people, I'm sure, out there in America somewhere that grew up without telephone. Or even, actually, you know, telephone, at some point, kids might not understand the word because they only understand cell phone. You know, I actually don't have a telephone in my house. I have a cell phone. I don't have a home line. So, you know, but what else? What else do you notice about these? Yeah, Oscar.
About the dog example, not everybody has to have experience with dogs and how they would respond to certain things.
True, right. A dog doesn't like being pulled on its tail. If you grow up with a dog.
I wouldn't know that.
Picture oddities. Which picture does not belong with the others? What was the quiz question that relates to that? Yeah, the tribe, the knife and the orange. You know, well, that's not an association we would probably make. But, you know, so that's, you know, culture dependent to some extent, and also experience dependent. Right. Right. Yeah. So there's different ways. Now that's also though part of the reason why there's many tests and there's many items within each test, so that if there's one thing that a person just interprets in a different way than they might even have done the next day, that in general they're still going to get a lot right and be higher than most people. But that's still a good point. Okay, so intelligence scores, 100 is the average. So if you take, and they make intelligence tests so that 100 is the average for like a given age for all the kids in the country. You can see genius is not up there. 140 or more is genius. And you can see mental retardation is down in the 67 to 70 or lower like range. Okay, so the thing we're going to focus on now and Monday is this, which is if you look in America at African American versus European American kids, you see about a 15-point difference in intelligence scores on average. Why is that? I mean, you know, first thing that needs to be stated is that kind of like gender differences or anything else that, you know, most people, if you look at kind of the overlap, like these two bell-shaped curves, like the middle part, like if you look at from the left, the blue line, and the right, the red line, that's bigger, there's more overlap than there is not overlap, is the first thing that needs to be said. So that a small mean, I mean, that's actually a pretty large mean difference, 15 points. Yeah, actually, oh, that one. Well, different studies come up with different things. Some studies have come up with a 15-point difference. This one is a 20-point difference. Anyway, so why do these differences occur? Oh, and by the way, I mean, so different ethnic groups fall on this continuum in different places. Hispanic American would fall in the middle of those two. Asian American and Jewish would be slightly higher than the white kids. Native American would be in between those two as well, in general. Well, first of all, maybe the items like we were just talking about, maybe these tests are biased. Maybe there's a cultural dependence to the questions that exist on these tests, and that influences the scores. So we saw some examples in other tests. The most common test given is called the WISC, to children that is. There's a scale with one item that's asked. It's kind of like a social problem solving, you might call it. The question is, what's the thing to do if another boy hits you? And then you give scores based on that. Now it has other items like, what's the thing to do if you notice a fire in a movie theater? Or what else? It gives you kind of social problems like that. But, I mean, obviously, what's the thing to do when a boy hits you? That's very culturally determined. Like, you know, there's different people that have different opinions about what the thing to do is. So clearly on the face validity of it, or what would be called face validity, seems to be that there would be bias to these items. However, that doesn't seem to explain the difference, at least not 100%, for at least 3 different reasons. Well, first of all is that back in the 70s, when people started looking at these differences and trying to think about it, psychologists that is, different psychologists, white psychologists, black psychologists, looked through and labeled, okay, which items do we think are the most culturally sensitive, or not? And first of all, different psychologists, including groups of black psychologists, had a hard time reaching consensus on which are the most kind of culturally sensitive items, or culturally specific items, I should say. But second of all, even when they did kind of figure out what those items are, and then they took those items out of figuring out what the IQ score would be, there still were IQ differences between the white and the black kids. So even pulling out those items that we talked about, I don't know if the ones we talked about are the ones they came up with, but the ones that were identified as the most kind of potentially culturally specific didn't seem to account for all the differences. There were differences in kind of more basic tests, that, like numbers and things like that, that still seem to be a difference. Well, second of all, it doesn't just seem to be the items, because another initiative that came out of that time period was something called the Raven Progressive Matrices Test. And this was an intelligence test that was supposed to be completely independent of culture. And so it was based solely on kind of visual spatial skills. And so this is an example of what you do. So what's the answer for this one? Yep, it's 6. So you got it quicker than I am, again, so you're strong. Typically, it's, for different, depending on the different tests, it's not the same in all the different tests, but like if you get it in the first 10 seconds, or if you get it in the first 30 seconds, or then you get it in the first minute, you get like 3, 2, or 1 point, or you get no points if you didn't get it at all, something like that. So all this does is there's no verbal requirements except for the instructions, and you just have to pick out the correct design. There was still, even on this test, you still see, or people, psychologists have seen group differences between white and black kids. So again, it doesn't seem to be just cultural specific items. And again, these are American kids we're talking about. That is accounting for that overall difference. Third, test anxiety. Well, maybe there's something about the whole idea of taking a test that's different for different cultures and subcultures. Maybe certain tests, certain cultures, kids in particular, respond to being in a testing situation differently. Maybe white kids are more familiar with the testing situation, and maybe black kids are less familiar and therefore get more anxious. So, in fact, one study that was done took more time. Typically, when you do an intelligence test, you do want to establish rapport with the kid before you start giving them the tests. So you take a couple minutes to do that, but not a whole lot of time. So one study let the examiner kind of hang out with the kid for a while, like a half an hour, before they started doing the test. And they, in fact, did find that cut the differences that we saw before in about half. So that it did seem that familiarity with the examiner and being comfortable with the testing situation seemed to make a big difference. However, that still leaves half. We had a 15-point or 12-point difference, right? So 15, 12, 15-point difference. It cuts it in half. So how do we explain? Let's stop there. I'm going to give you the answer on Monday.